What are some key immigration issues facing us in the United States? Find out next on Practical Law. Stay tuned. Welcome to Practical Law. I'm your host, family law and divorce attorney Henry Gornbein. I'm also pleased to say that Practical Law is now being co-sponsored by the Oakland County Bar Association. We are entering another presidential election cycle, and one of the hot button issues seems to be how to handle immigration in the United States. Today on Practical Law, I'm pleased to welcome as my guest immigration attorney Josef Flynn, as we discuss some of these really important hot button issues. Joe, welcome to Practical Law.
Thank you, Henry, for having me on today. I'm very excited to talk about this with you.
First of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
So I am originally from Colombia, South America, not South Carolina. I am an immigrant myself as a result of that, and I grew up in Rhode Island. I moved to Michigan to pursue law school at the University of Michigan Law School, and then I decided that I liked it enough to stay for a while, and I now practice in Bloomfield Hills.
What is the focus of your practice now?
Immigration law. So 85% of my practice is immigration-based. The other 15% of the time I help Ms. Cronin, who you are familiar with,
yes, with
some of her other cases.
And what are some of the key issues you're facing in the immigration practice that you have?
There are so many, but primarily we deal with family-based immigration. And so people who are here who would like to bring their family into the United States from overseas by pursuing all the appropriate channels.
What are the two classifications of immigrants in the United States?
So first off, I think most people don't realize that not everybody who is from another country and in the United States is an immigrant. There are two broad classifications of people who are in the United States who are nationals of other countries. One is immigrants and the other one is non-immigrants. Non-immigrants are people who are here for temporary visits. So some of the people who are here working are considered non-immigrants because their stays expire after a defined period of time. And then there are immigrants who are the people who intend to reside and live here indefinitely. And so those are the two sort of over-encompassing groups of people that are here. And within the immigrant category, there are people who have gained that classification either through family ties or through employment-based ties.
Now, don't we also have, Joe, a lot of people who are here temporarily, both on work visas and on student visas as well?
Correct, and those people are typically considered non-immigrants.
What are the two paths to legal immigration here in the United States?
So within the immigrant category, there are family-based visas and employment-based visas. Both processes involve a lot of paperwork. They're both very strenuous for people who are not very familiar with the American legal process. And they can both take a very, very long time to accomplish that immigrant classification. But employment and family-based are sort of the two ways to go.
Typically, and this is kind of, might be hard to answer, let's say someone is on a path to immigration, wants to become a citizen. How long is the typical course? Assuming they are here, let's assume they are here legally, which is...
So that's the loaded question, right?
Yes.
So first of all, a lot of the time, the classification of immigrants starts when you're abroad. And so somebody here has to file a petition for you to be able to come into the country. That process can take anywhere from 6 months if you're the immediate relative of an American citizen to 20 years plus if you're just the brother or sister of an American citizen. And then once you're here on a green card status, and you hold that for approximately 5 years, and then you can apply for your citizenship.
How long does it take to get green card status?
So that's going to depend on how you're seeking to get into the country. So if, for example, I'm sure you've heard of people who go abroad and marry somebody in another country. If that's the case, usually they can come into the country with a green card within about a year. But if you're the brother or sister of an American citizen, for example, my grandmother petitioned for her sister in 2002, and we're still waiting for her to be able to make her way over.
So what is the process for becoming a U.S. citizen? I mean, you have the green card status, and what are some of the other hurdles or steps that someone must go through, assuming they're here legally?
So during the entirety of the time that you hold green card status, you have to first and foremost be on your best behavior. There are certain barriers to citizenship, of which criminal behavior is one of them. And so people are very, very careful during the time that they have that green card status. And then once you complete your sort of statutory requirement of being a green card holder for 5 years, you apply to immigration and say, I would like to become a citizen. That process takes approximately 5 months. During that time, they take an extensive background check. They run your fingerprints to make sure that there is nothing outstanding that immigration doesn't know about. And then you have an interview during which an immigration officer tries to determine if you're a person of good moral character and thus desirable to stay in the United States. And they give you an exam. And that exam is based on history and civics. There are 100 questions which you have to study, of which they ask approximately 5 to 10. And then they have a written and writing and reading English requirement as well.
Is it a difficult exam?
No. So I went through that about, a year and a half ago. And it wasn't difficult for me, but you can understand where it would be difficult for somebody who doesn't speak the language.
I guess the question I have, would a lot of U.S. citizens who've been born and raised here but who are not well educated have problems with this exam?
Yes, that is certainly something that is often discussed among immigration practitioners, that a lot of people would fail it if given the test. They ask a lot of questions about history and dates when the Declaration of Independence was signed, for example, things that the majority of Americans sort of push to the background and don't really concern themselves with.
Well, it seems history is an area that's kind of been pushed to the wayside a lot in our educational system, sadly.
Absolutely. And so most people would fail that exam, as you correctly pointed out.
Big issue is illegal aliens, undocumented aliens. What are some of the barriers that lead to the fact that we have, I guess, millions of people who are undocumented in the United States?
So undocumented immigration is sort of what we like to call the perfect storm, right? You have people who live in third world countries under very dire circumstances, and they're just dying to get out. Then they face this issue of, I might have a legal way to pursue immigration to the United States, but I'm going to be waiting 20 years before I can get there. And so they just come. And once they're here, if they try to apply for status once they're here, A, they also still have to wait the 20 years, and B, if they've been here undocumented for a period of greater than 1 year, they're forced to leave the country and go back to their home country for 10 years before they can come back. And so that pushes many people to not even consider the option of normalizing their status because they don't want to have to go back for 10 years.
Let's say someone comes here from Colombia
Yes.
and they're here on
I
vacation.
might know a person or two that
Yeah.
did that.
And they come on vacation and just stay. Are they then considered an illegal undocumented?
Correct. After the expiration of your visa, then you stay here and you are undocumented until you do something to normalize your status. And as I mentioned, that's something that can be very burdensome and difficult to do.
It's a hot button issue. What are anchor babies?
Anchor babies don't really exist.
They don't exist?
No. So they're a legal fallacy. People think that if an undocumented immigrant is in the United States and they have an American-born child, that child automatically gives them a path to citizenship. Yes, in the very abstract world, maybe that is the possibility, but they have to wait for that child to turn 18 and then to file a petition for their parent to become documented. And then usually that parent is forced to leave, as I mentioned, for a period of 10 years before they can come back to the United States.
So basically, if you have a child here, the baby's a U.S. citizen, the baby can stay, but the parents, goodbye.
Oh, correct. And thus, whenever people are faced with deportation, that's sort of a very difficult choice to make. What happens to the baby? Does the baby go with, or child, whatever the case might be, do they go with the parents back to whatever the home country is, or do they leave them in the U.S. under the care of a relative who might have status or who might not have status? Or give them up for adoption or things like that. So it's a very difficult situation when people are faced with deportation and they have American-born children.
I have a question for you, Joe, and that is, and this is just based upon my reading articles and hearing news, is that the Obama administration has probably been tougher on deporting illegal immigrants than the prior administrations. Is that correct?
So there have been more deportations under the Obama administration than under any other presidential administration in the recent past. And so that is correct. What leads to this is probably there's been a tougher border presence, and so more people are captured at the border. And when those people are captured, they're sort of not entitled to some of the same constitutional protections that you have once you're in the United States. And thus the numbers have been staggering under the Obama administration. That is correct.
Joe, why is immigration reform so critical? And it seems like I've been doing this show for about 17 years now, and I've had numerous immigration attorneys on the show over the years, and we're always talking about the fact that there's immigration reform, it's pending, it's talked about, but nothing ever happens.
Right. So I think the reason why nothing ever happens, first of all, is because people can't seem to agree on what the best way to fix the immigration system is. The one thing that everybody can seem to agree on is the immigration system as it currently stands is not effective and needs to be fixed. But the ways to fix that vary significantly from one party to the other, or even from people within the same party. People just can't seem to wrap their heads around what to do to fix the current situation.
We've got an election season coming up. We're in the middle of 2015. Next year there'll be a presidential election, and immigration is one of the hot button issues. Let's start with the Democratic or more liberal position. What is that with regard to immigration reform?
Right, and so I hate to use the term Democratic or liberal because of course not everybody thinks the same way in one party, and I struggle with that a little bit. But the majority position or the plurality position in the Democratic Party seems to be that something needs to be done to normalize the status of the approximately 11 million people who are living in the US and who are undocumented. And then once we deal with that, we can deal with everything else. On the other hand, the Republican Party, or the more conservative party, is of the mindset that those 11 million people who are here have broken the law, and they should not have a path to normalizing their status, that they should go through these burdens that we've talked about and take their spot in line, as people often like to say. And that what we should focus on is making it easier for people who have advanced degrees or who have come to the U.S. to pursue an education to stay and sort of contribute to the economy of the United States.
Do you see either side making any headway?
Somebody needs to, right? It seems, because of late developments, it seems like the people who are here undocumented do need to be dealt with in one way or another. And it seems like particularly this proposed temporary status that President Obama proposed, which is currently being litigated, it seems like that might provide an avenue for at least half of those people to be able to stay here with some status and be able to be gainfully employed and have a driver's license and sort of come out of the shadows, as the president has said. And I think once that is a reality, then people will begin to focus on how to make the rest of the immigration system much more effective.
Why are people so vehemently opposed to it?
Because everybody just thinks that these people broke the law and that they're criminals and that they should go back to where they came from and get in line. Unfortunately, to those people, I have to say that the immigration code says that immigration violations are not criminal in nature. And so to categorize these individuals as criminals is really not fair. And it drives a lot of the rhetoric, and it drives the rhetoric for some of the wrong reasons. And so, I think economically speaking, it also makes sense to just give people an opportunity to work with a valid Social Security number and to pay their taxes as everybody else does. And then we can see whether that actually has beneficial implications or not, and then deal with it at that point.
Wouldn't that bring a lot of revenues into our economy and tax revenues that we otherwise don't get?
You would think so, and that's why it would make sense to do something about that. Because otherwise, sure, a lot of undocumented immigrants still pay taxes, and I know that from my clients, and I know that from other people that I have personal knowledge of, but some of them certainly don't, and so we do need to deal with that so that they can, and so that everybody can, and then we can see the tax revenues and perhaps at that point fix some of the other issues.
Joe, what is the 90-day fiancé conundrum?
So the 90-day fiancé conundrum is people seem to think that it's very easy for an American citizen to go and pick up a fiancé abroad, and it kind of is. That's the easiest way to get somebody into the country.
I've handled a lot of green card divorces, so I see it all the time.
Right. It's the easiest thing that you can do within the immigration code. You go and you meet somebody abroad, you're an American citizen, you apply for that person to come to the United States. It takes anywhere from 8 months to a year, usually, and then they come into the United States, and you have 90 days within which you have to marry that person. The statute says that if you don't get married within 90 days, that person then has to go back. If you do get married within the 90 days, then that person has a path to their green card. And once they have their green card, because they're married to a U.S. citizen, they have a shorter path to citizenship, which is 3 years. And so if we're concerned about immigration and sort of immigration for the wrong reasons, that is one loophole that should probably be closed, because you're making it extremely easy for people to bring in fiancés, and sometimes they're not the people who come to the United States to contribute to the economy and whatnot. And of course, some of my clients will be very upset that I just said that, but it's the truth. Sometimes they come to be just stay at home while their husband continues to work, or vice versa. And thus, it's probably not the most efficient use of a quick path into the United States.
Now, to continue on that path, don't they have to be married at least, 2 years? Otherwise, it could be deemed a sham marriage and could be thrown out?
Right. So you do have to continue to stay in a bona fide relationship for a period of 2 years. There are ways out of that. One way is you can prove that your United States citizen spouse abandoned you or that that person was abusive. And then you can get out of that requirement. But typically, you do have to stay married for that period of 2 years or longer. On that note, though, a lot of people who do enter into the marriage for all the right reasons will, after the marriage sort of ends, will stay married with their foreign spouse because they know that and because not all marriages end as badly as some of the divorces I'm sure you've seen. And sometimes you want to continue to help your ex-spouse. Sometimes they're now the mother of your children or the father of your children. And so that's sort of immigration fraud that we don't really pay attention to, is the people who stay married just so that the person can get out of that 2-year conditional green card.
Joe, what about issues in human trafficking, which seems to be in the headlines all the time these days?
Human trafficking is a very hot topic issue. I had the opportunity to work for 3 semesters, which is half of my law school career, at the Human Trafficking Clinic at the University of Michigan Law School. And there students took on clients, and all of our clients were victims of human trafficking in one way or another, whether it was sex trafficking or labor trafficking. And the statute, the Immigration and Nationality Act, provides a way for them to be able to stay in the United States first as non-immigrants for 3 years while they help with the prosecution of their perpetrators. And then once they've done that and sort of satisfied all the requirements that come along with that, then it provides them with a path to permanent residence. Also, during that 3 years, they can bring in their family members from their home country so that they can sort of help them deal with the trauma and the stress of the situation that they've just encountered. So it's actually one of the more donative aspects of the immigration statute.
How widespread is human trafficking?
How widespread? It's very difficult to say because a lot of people do not report it, but it is pretty widespread, especially in the Michigan area. Again, it's very difficult to give you numbers, but I know that in the human trafficking clinic, we had approximately 100 cases at any given time, and they ranged from children to senior citizens, and they were men and women. And so it's very difficult to say, but certainly 100 cases is 100 cases too many.
What about issues involving domestic violence as it impacts on immigration?
Right, so the domestic violence is one of the avenues that I told you that you can get out of the conditional residence requirement. And while I was at the clinic, I also had the opportunity to work on some of those cases, which is you just basically petition to immigration and you say, I entered into this marriage, it was a bona fide marriage, and I didn't want to stay in it because the other spouse was abusive, but I still would like to stay in the US and be a contributing member to society, and they give you the opportunity then to remove the conditions on your green card and have a path to citizenship. And I have to tell you, working on those cases is some of the most rewarding work you will ever do because these people are very distraught. A lot of times the reason why they put up with the domestic violence is because the US citizen spouse will sort of hold over their head, you can't leave me because if you do, you have to go back to X country. And going back to X country is sort of a non-option at that point. And so people stay in these really horrible situations for that reason, and being able to help them out of that is very rewarding.
Joe, what about issues involving U.S. citizens wanting to immigrate to Canada?
So that's been a really popular sort of topic lately, and I get a ton of calls about it all the time.
Why is that?
People just want to leave. Discontent, I think, with the economic downturn. People want to pursue sort of this Canadian ideal of everybody will be okay if they come to Canada. I don't know. You know, they perpetrate the universal health care and all of the things that we sort of have shied away from. And so people just want to go there. But Canada makes it really difficult for anybody who's had a criminal conviction in the United States to immigrate. And we've had a lot of those cases lately where people come in wanting to go to Canada, but they can't because of a criminal conviction that happened 20 and 30 years ago sometimes. And so there's a process in Canada called rehabilitation, by which you prove to the Canadian government that even though you had this one criminal conviction, or sometimes more than one, you're now rehabilitated and you're not going to reoffend while you're in Canada. It's a pretty straightforward process, and sometimes you wish that the American immigration system worked as efficiently as that does.
Joe, where do you see immigration reform going?
So first off, I think we are going to deal with the undocumented immigrant situation in one way or another. And I think a happy medium would probably be to allow the temporary protected status, which is, again, not a path to citizenship or even to legal residence, but it's just a way for people who are here regardless to be able to work and drive and do everything else they need to do with documents.
Well, isn't that what Obama did by executive order?
Right. And so I think where people are upset is that he did it by executive order rather than going through the through the House and the Senate. But I think that is ultimately going to happen.
Well, he did it because the House and the Senate can't get their act together.
Some would say that. Some would say they just can't seem to agree. But yes, I know that that's why he did it. But I think ultimately the courts are going to side with him and say that he was within his powers to take that executive action.
Do you see any chance of meaningful immigration reform happening before we have a new president, new House and Senate, which is, we're talking about a year and a half from now?
I don't, unfortunately. It's something that we've been talking about quite extensively for quite a few years now, and it just hasn't happened. And we need, I hate to say this, but we do need to sort of have the same party in control of both the House and the Senate, and possibly even the presidency, in order to be able to make any strides on immigration, because as long as they continue to be controlled by opposite parties, we're going to continue to have a deadlock. Whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, if one party sort of has control of everything, I think that's probably the best bet that we have of making anything meaningful happen in immigration.
And the parties can't even agree amongst themselves.
Right. And so that's why you need a majority of one party everywhere, so that at least within that majority you can get a plurality of people that can help make things happen.
Joe, we're out of time. We've just scratched the surface. I want to thank you for being my guest on Practical Law. I want to thank you for watching Practical Law.